reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer greatly from the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Then Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. God forbid it, Lord. No such thing shall ever happen to you. He turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do. Then Jesus said to his disciples, Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What profit would there be for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? Or what can one give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man will come with his angels in his Father's glory, and then he will repay all according to his conduct. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. How many of you remember last Sunday's Gospel reading? Or anything about last Sunday's Gospel? And for those of you who aren't familiar with last Sunday's Gospel, who need a refresher, we heard last Sunday from the 16th chapter of Matthew. Jesus asked his disciples, Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter has the courage and he has the tenacity to answer, You are Christ, the Son of a living God. And Jesus rewards Peter. That's the right answer. Good job, Peter. Great job. You answered correctly. You passed the test. You are now Peter. Your name is not Simon. It is now Rock. You are the Rock. And upon this rock, upon this foundation, upon this cornerstone, I'm going to build my church. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And he gives him the keys to the kingdom of heaven that no one can dispute. In today's gospel reading, we hear a stark contrast to last Sunday's, where we hear Jesus rebuking Peter, Get behind me, Satan. Now the interesting thing about this is that these aren't two far off, far away gospels on different days, different occasions, different years in the life of Peter and the life of Jesus. It turns out that today's gospel reading is an exact continuation of last Sunday's gospel reading. It is in succession. It is immediately following last Sunday's gospel reading. Or if you want to look it up to make sure, you can. But last Sunday's gospel ended at the 16th chapter of Matthew, verse 20. Today's gospel reading picks up verse 21 of that same chapter, that 16th chapter of Matthew. Here we are in the same day, in the same conversation, in the same location, the region of Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus just praised and honored Peter. Here we are in a matter of seconds later. Jesus rebukes Peter and calls him Satan and embarrasses him in front of the other disciples. It turns out that this conversationally, if you take it in context, these two gospel readings, from the point where Jesus calls Peter Rock and praises him to this point now, it's about 10 seconds chronologically. From verse 18 to verse 22, compositionally, 4 verses later, Jesus has turned against Peter and is now calling him Satan. Verse 18 of the 16th chapter of Matthew, Jesus praises Peter. You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. By the time verse 22 rolls around, he's calling him Satan and an obstacle and get behind me. 4 verses compositionally, about 10 seconds, give or take a few, conversationally, chronologically, Jesus has turned Peter's world upside down. Their relationship has done a full 180. How very true that can be in our own lives, where we have to watch what we say and what we do and how we act around others. Because what we might say without thinking twice about it without really putting a lot of thought into it, could ruin somebody's day, could ruin somebody's world, and could turn your relationship with that person upside down. You could also turn a full 180. Where if you say the wrong thing at the wrong time, even if to you it's just words leaving your mouth, no thought about it, for that person, for the receiver of those words, whether it be an insult or a jab or a zinger, whether intentional or not, if that person is hurt and crushed by those words, most often they won't tell you. And you just ruined their day. You've made them rethink their life, possibly. And the power of words is strong. Words are very powerful. You know, the saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Yeah, that has some truth to it. In a physical sense, yeah, sticks and stones, they can break your bones, they can hurt you, they can cause bodily harm that words cannot. But in an even greater sense, words can cause psychological, emotional, mental harm, which can sometimes be even worse and even more cunning and even more painful than physical pain. Where the tongue and the words that we speak, the words that leave our mouth, could be the greatest weapon that we possess. It can do the most good. We can praise people. We can build them up with compliments, with praises, with acclamations. We can call people the rock. You answered correctly. You're the rock. Great job. I'm going to build my church on you. You're the best. Keep up the good work. Those words can build people up. But at the same time, and at the same moment, what leaves our mouth, what comes from our tongue and our lips, can destroy a person. Well, if we're not careful what we say. We can insult someone. We can bring up something from the past, reopening a past wound, a bad memory of the past. Or we can insult somebody or someone close to that person. And we can never get those words back once they've left our mouth and our tongue. We have to be careful what we say and what we do, because even if to us means nothing, it could have dire consequences for the receiver of those words. I'm not saying that Jesus was wrong to rebuke Peter in verse 22 of the 16th chapter of Matthew. Actually, Jesus was justified. One, because he's Jesus, he's God. And two, because Peter had it coming. Let's take a step back. Look back a verse or two in the 16th chapter of Matthew and see, what did Peter do? What did Peter say to deserve such harsh words coming from Jesus? Let's take a look a little bit earlier in the 16th chapter of Matthew, where we hear that Jesus is telling his disciples that he has to go to Jerusalem and suffer at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and die, ultimately. And then on the third day, be raised. But what Peter doesn't want to happen is he doesn't want to lose his friend. He doesn't want Jesus to have to die. He's liking what's happening. He's got a good thing going here. He was just praised and complimented by Jesus. He doesn't want to lose his best friend. So, as any good friend would do, Peter tries to intervene and interject and try to prevent this death. No, Lord, there's no way this is going to happen. I'm not going to let it happen. I'm going to stand by your side, and I'm going to make sure that nobody hurts you and nobody lays a hand on you, Jesus. And there's a quote in there from Peter, God forbid it, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you. Peter thought he was saying the right thing. Peter thought this was an opportunity, a little toss-up of a question just to test his faith. And Peter, are you really going to stand by me when bad stuff happens to me? But no, that wasn't what Jesus was looking for. That's why Jesus rebuked Peter. But you see, Peter, the problem with Peter is that he tried to interfere and intervene in God's plan. God didn't want Peter intervening at this moment. God had a plan for Peter's life and a plan for Jesus' life, but Jesus would have to die. Peter would be alone for a little bit, sad, mourning, and grieving, until Jesus rose from the dead. And then they would spend another 40 days with each other. That was God's plan, but Peter tried to interject and intervene and prevent God's plan from reaching fulfillment in the way that God intends. You know, the saying goes that if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans. Because God has a plan for all of us in our lives. And he doesn't want us messing it up. He doesn't want us screwing up his plan. He doesn't want us trying to take matters into our own hands that are out of our control. But if we let God take the driver's seat, if we don't try to shove him in the back seat and try to take control of our lives and our situations in life, God will make things happen the way that he intends, the way that is written in his almighty plan, and the way that usually for us is better than anything we can muster or try to change or alter in God's plan. We need to recognize God at work in our lives. And we can't just try to fix everything, fix all of our problems, all of our hardships, all of our doubts and uncertainties in life. We can't just try to fix them ourselves. God's taking too long. God's not answering my prayer. I don't even think God's listening. We can't grow impatient. We can't try to prevent God's plan from happening just because it seems like it's better for us if Jesus doesn't die. It's better for us to keep the friendship going. We're living in the midst of a lot of difficulties in our world. Stuff that we might like to take in our own hands. We're in the midst of a pandemic, racial unrest, political division, going back to school, sending our children back to school. All of these things can cause worry and anxiety and stress and concern. Whether it just be one of those things or all of those things, I understand, I get it. It's difficult. It's a crazy world that we're living in a crazy year. But if we just sit back and we let God take control of a situation, even if it might seem that he's being quiet, awfully quiet for an awfully long time, even if it seems like he's not interfering and he's not intervening, he will in his time, in his way, and in his plan. But the worst thing that we can do is try to intervene and try to step in the way of God's plan and take matters into our own hands. I'm not saying that we have to completely sit back and let God do all the work. Some of it we have to do ourselves. But we have to recognize where God's plan needs our help. We can't pass up every opportunity just thinking that God is going to help us out. We can't be on that end of the spectrum completely, but we also can't be on the end of the spectrum where we want to solve every single problem. We want to take matters into our own hands all the time. We need to be right in the middle. We need to find that common ground where we will be passive. Continue to pray and continue to look for ways that we can help God in his plan, ways that he needs us, ways that he's trying to reach out to us to help and to do good and to help solve the problem, but not try to take everything into our own hands and not try to forget about God like Peter did. Peter was like, God, I don't like that plan. I'm not letting Jesus die. You can't do that. No. Whenever we're in the midst of a situation where we need to let God in control, we need to let God in control. Let him take the driver's seat. You can be the passenger. You can give him directions sometimes when he needs it. You can help him read a road sign ahead. Whatever it is that God needs you to do in that moment, but don't try to take control of a situation yourself. And don't try to step in the way of God's plan. Because most of the time, we'll just end up screwing it up more. We might get rebuked. We might get called Satan. We might say, get behind me. Because we need to let God deal with our problems and our uncertainties and our anxieties. Because it is in his plan, and he has a plan for us. On his time and in his way. But we just need to trust God. Even if it seems like he's not listening or answering our prayers. We need to trust God to answer all of our needs and concerns in his plan, in his power, and in his way.